I just started to really learn that one, these materialistic things don't matter. It's all replaceable. It's all, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is community. And so I started to really value and love community.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Yanire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Odalys Jasmine, a Latina creator, podcaster, and storyteller who believes authenticity is the key component of a successful personal brand. And she's here to tell you, si se puede, my friends, si se puede. Odalys Jasmine, welcome to LatinX Can.
Hola, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I mean, this is like pretty amazing that, I get to talk to somebody that's doing so much to uplift the Latinx community. So it's an honor to have you.
Oh, well, I could say likewise. I've listened to LatinX Can podcast and love what you're doing to amplify the community. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Oh, where does my story begin? My story really begins in 2008. I think that's when I went through a really pivotal moment in my life. And it was the first recession. There's this other looming recession happening right now, right? But it's the first recession that I was a part of. And I think that was the moment I kind of grew up and I started to do this advocacy work from a young age. But in 2008, my family, we lost our home, and there was 9 of us living in our cars and living on the street and living in different people's homes. And a lot of my childhood prior, I didn't realize that I was growing up in poverty. I didn't realize that I was growing up in a low income area. I didn't realize I was growing up in the hood, in the ghetto, right? Until that moment happened and we started kind of venturing outside of San Diego, outside of Southeast San Diego, and really understanding, I think for me, understanding that where I come from is different than how the rest of San Diego kind of lived. And it was the first moment where I realized that being undocumented, being an immigrant, not that I was undocumented or an immigrant, my family is, but for me, I understood that my experience as a U.S. citizen was very different than the experience of my family who, I mean, all my 6 siblings were all born in Honduras. My parents were born in Honduras, and I was born here along with my brother. And that experience is different. And I just realized life is going to be a little harder for us. And that was just the reality. And I think since then, I've navigated so many different experiences, being first generation first, and also knowing that I need to create access so that no one else kind of goes through the same things that I went through. I need to create access to knowledge, right, and opportunity, because those are the 2 things that I wish I had when I was younger. I need to create representation because as a young Honduran girl growing up in San Diego, I was like, ¿Y todos los hondureños dónde estamos? Like, we're so for me, I knew, I didn't know how to quite word it when I was younger, pero sabía, I knew that I needed to create access to knowledge, to opportunity, to representation from that moment on. And that's what I've done for the last, I don't even know how many years it's been since 2008 because no soy buena para matemáticas, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But I think that's really where my story kind of begins.
Wow, girl, that's 15 years ago,
Crazy.
I know. You mentioned 2008. 2007 is when I came to the States. So for me, it's always really hard to figure out how many years I've been in the States. I mean, even it's just like kind of those things that it takes you back, right? And you're like, oh, I've only been here for 10 years? Wait, 15, 16 years? What?
Wow.
When did this happen? Yeah.
Wow. I mean, how was that experience for you in 2007 coming here and then the recession hit hard? What did that
Yeah,
feel
I
like?
mean, I was in college. I had just started
Wow.
college, so I don't even think that I understood what was happening. I don't
Yeah.
know. I actually don't have any recollection of there being a recession
Oh,
because of the
wow.
privilege that I had, right? Like,
Yeah.
I was in school, I was here by myself, yeah, but I had a full ride in the university.
Mhm.
So I didn't even have to think about anything else. And I was just oblivious, living in my own bubble, not
Oh, wow.
realizing what was happening. The only memory is that one of my best friends graduated in 2010 and she had a really hard time finding a job.
Mm.
And so that is the only memory that I have of that time, actually, of like,
Wow.
realizing that it was a hard time for many, many people.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine too coming to this country and also like you don't know the politics, the
Yeah.
economy. You're just like, I'm going to school.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think so much of my life has been like that, right? Like, it's like I didn't start understanding politics or even became involved with politics in the States until 2015 when Trump decided 2014 Trump decided
Oh,
to
yeah.
run for elections, and then like I started paying more attention because things just kind of made very loud noises, and it reminded me a lot of like the speech in Venezuela when I was growing up. That was the kind of speech that I was hearing, even though it was on the other side of the political spectrum. So
Wow.
that's when I started. But at least the first time I ever voted was last year in the midterms elections.
Wow.
Ever.
Well,
Ever.
congrats. My mom finally was not able to
Yeah.
vote, so I know that's a big deal.
I know it's huge, like it's one of those things
Um,
is it's huge. But when you talked about your story, there's so many things in there, right? The
mhm.
first thing that I gather is, you are a proud Hondureña, your family is from Honduras, you were born in the States, but you identified as a Honduran, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because you just asked, like, ¿dónde están todos los hondureños? For me, growing up in Venezuela, right, most of the people that I'm exposed to is from Venezuela. And now I've got to know more people from Central America, and I follow them on Instagram, and I see them going back to their countries, to El Salvador or Honduras, and like these places are just gorgeous, right? Like all the things that I've seen on their pictures, I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. And then I realized that the image that I have of Central America is the image that we see on TV every day, right?
Mhm.
That place where people, there's a lot of poverty and people escape from. And so there's no opportunities. And I just realized like that can't be the whole
Yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
So coming from you, from somebody from Honduras, what do you think Honduran people are like? What is Honduras like? What have you learned from your parents and your family?
Oh my God, que somos macizos. That's what we say. Somos macizos, which means like we're just the bomb. I mean, oh my God, I love this question because although I was born in the US, so much of my life was immersed in ser hondureña. Like that's all
Hmm.
I grew up with. I grew up with baleadas, which is our staple food, which is a handmade flour tortilla. It's a little thick. And then por adentro, we put frijoles, we put
Oh man.
crema, aguacate, eggs. I mean, you can really put anything in it and you can eat it any time of the day, which I do.
Hmm.
Um, and a big part of our culture is music. I mean, merengue and
Oh,
punta. Punta is our biggest thing. Punta, it comes from our Garifuna community, which is our African community within
oh, cool.
Honduras. And that's where a lot of our music came from. And so punta, which is, I think, only really Nicaraguenses and Hondurans dance punta, but it's almost like está moviendo la cadera, like you move it really, really fast. And it's so fun. It's like my favorite dance. But a lot of where my family grew up, we grew up in La Costa Norte. I mean, they grew up in
Hmm.
La Costa Norte. I say we because that's what was in my home. But they grew up in La Costa Norte, which is close to the Caribbean. And I mean, really heavy, like Caribbean culture. So por la
Mm.
playa, comiendo mariscos,
Hmm.
and just having this joy of life. And that's
Yeah.
all I can really explain in terms of my community. I mean, the people from La Costa están
Yeah.
sonriendo, they're son gente
Hmm.
feliz, they're happy. They don't need
Hmm.
a lot, but they're happy with what they have. and they're all about community and family, and it's just a beautiful community. But to your point, it's not these rainbows and butterflies and beaches. There's
Yeah.
so much poverty in Honduras. And, you know, one of the reasons that my dad left Honduras was because I think he said something like, if you are from one political party or the other, that dictates whether you get a job or not. So if you don't, and I know that happens across a lot of Latin American countries, including Venezuela, right? I mean, we could talk about Venezuela all day.
For sure.
But he, you know, because of the party that he identified with, it was hard to get work. It was hard to get jobs. It was hard to, you know, seguir adelante. I mean, it was hard to progress in your career. And so they left, you know, my dad left, his family left, and that was their way of getting opportunity. But I mean, my mom, on the other hand, she grew up with a lot of privilege. She had riqueza, dinero. I mean, she would go to the poor country or the poor areas in Honduras to give back when she was there. And she had a very different experience. She was like, well, Honduras is great. I mean, we traveled everywhere. All my siblings went to private school. They traveled all over Central America. O sea, su experiencia era distinto. But my mom was running away from an abusive marriage and was running away from just a terrible situation that literally the only thing that she could do is take all 5 kids, and one brother stayed in Honduras. She took all 5 kids and she left to the United States, and she didn't know the language, but she knew that her kids deserved a home where she wasn't being abused, and she deserved opportunity to work, to create a life that was with independence in mind. And my mom forever is my inspiration for that. But she came here, left all the money, left all her businesses, and she started from nothing. And I think that's the most beautiful part of my parents' story, is that they were both running away from Honduras because of different situations that show what Latin America, what its flaws are, you know, and what the system has done to them in terms of, one, being a woman, and 2, just because of your political party, you can't get access to opportunity. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things, though, is like what I get from your experience so far is that even though they ran away from a country where they had very few opportunities, like the love for their country never ceased, you know?
Never.
They brought it with them, and it's always there, because like you feel the same love, right?
Oh my God. So it's funny because I grew up around my whole family. I was so lucky that I grew up around so many tíos, tías, primos, primas, and I grew up in this big Honduran community. So it was almost not normal to eat like American food, like burgers, and you know what I mean? Like we ate baleadas and we ate carne coco, and that was, I think my family always indirectly showed how much love they had for Honduras, whether it was in the music, in the food, in the language, the way we speak, calling us guirros, which is how you say kids in Honduras, or cipotes. I mean, you're just raised in that environment. And my dad actually spent some time kind of running away from Honduras. Like, I never want to go back to Honduras. I never want to do this, because there was so much pain attached to it. My mom always talked about Honduras as like, you know, when the viejitos in your family just talk about, oh, you know, I in mi país, you know what I mean? That was my mom all the time. She would tell me like, oh, hija, en mi país yo iba ahí, allá. And I mean, I learned so much about my history and my culture through them, but it was honestly in the pandemic where I appreciated their stories so much more. You know, you grow up around it, you just hear, oh, okay, Honduras, Honduras, Honduras. But during the pandemic, I moved back home, and talking to my parents and having cafecitos with them, I think I craved hearing more about Honduras, more about their stories, and more about how they grew up, and my grandma, my grandpa, y cómo era así allá. Like, I learned so much about them, and I still am learning so much more about them. And I'm actually doing a mini series. This is like soon to come, but I'm doing a mini series on my parents' journey to the US in June. So we have some time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's powerful to ask your parents their story because so much of
Mhm.
their story is and their sacrifice of coming here is
Yeah.
rooted in my experience. And
Yeah.
that's forever part of my journey and story.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when we also sit down, I've realized I've also started to ask my parents more about how they grew up when they were little and how they did. And that just I realized that I'm getting old because now I'm getting interested
Right?
in their story. That just because we are getting
I
older.
know, but you know what? I heard this quote one time and it said someone was talking about losing their grandma and how losing their grandma felt like losing a piece of their history and a piece,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I kind of see my parents as, and all the viejitos in my family. Like I see them
Mm-hmm.
as almost these archives of our stories and these museums of our experiences of
Yeah.
where we come from.
Right.
And so much of why I'm doing the mini series because I want to archive their stories forever so that cuando tengan mis
Mm-hmm.
hijos, when I have my kids, that they can listen to Abuelita talk about growing up in La Costa de Honduras and building her businesses. Like, I want them to listen to these stories that are so a part of our DNA, but you grow up
Yeah.
not realizing how important they are. You're just like trying to be an
Yeah.
adult or trying to work or trying to just get through,
Exactly.
life. But
Yeah.
yeah, we are getting old.
Yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned right at the beginning is that 2008 was a very hard time for your family, and you and your family experienced a period where you were houseless. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that experience was like and how it shaped your life or how it affected your life. And the reason why I ask this is because even I, at some point not too far from today, for example, I had this perspective of houseless people as people who just like, don't want to work hard or something like that. And that's how they ended up in that situation. But now I realize is not, that's again, not the whole story, right?
Mm. Oh, this part of my story was so pivotal, and it's always, not that it's funny, but it makes me laugh a little bit every time I talk about this story because it used to be something I was so ashamed of. And
Mm,
it wasn't until 2019 where I started to really own where I came from and own
mm,
my story and own that period of my life that I used to, like you said, people create these assumptions like you didn't work hard enough or you don't have a job or you don't have
right.
this. And I was always so ashamed to share that because I didn't want to be one, a pity story, and I didn't want two, for them to make up any assumptions about my family that weren't
Mm-hmm.
true. And now I talk about it from a place that feels so healing and therapeutic. And it makes me smile when I think about it because it's almost like a sign of my own growth. But
Mm,
that period of my life, I mean, it's kind of a blur the way it happened. It was one minute, we were, let's say, eating baleadas in my house. Everything was
mm-hmm.
fine. I was the little
Mm-hmm.
sister. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
youngest of seven, just to paint that
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of, it was normal, a normal day.
Yeah.
And the next day, we're packing up and I'm being told to move things around. And
Yeah.
nothing was quite communicated to me because as the
Mm-hmm.
youngest, you're always kind of to the side, that
Yeah.
chiquita, oh,
For sure.
you can't be part of adult
Mm-hmm.
conversations. That was a lot of my experience. So
Mm-hmm.
as a kid, I'm not understanding what's going on. I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll pack up my things in my Scooby Doo case. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you don't know
Yeah.
what's
Yeah. For
going
sure.
on.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing I know, we're living in our expedition in our truck and we're spending the night at the park and nothing's really making sense to me. And
Mm.
one memory from that moment that sticks to me forever is my mom told me to go run errands with her. And we're riding around and we go to this. I don't know if you've ever seen the coin machines where you put the coins in and it gives you, I think it gives you like
Yeah.
either a ticket to redeem cash or something like that. But we had these jugs of just pennies and coins, and I thought it was fun. I was helping her put it in the
Yeah.
machine and we were
Yeah.
getting the ticket out. And we go to the store and then we buy some food, some snacks, and she gets tortillas, the warm, like batch tortillas. And I remember telling her, like, Mom, I'm really hungry. I'm really hungry. And she rolls up a tortilla and gives it to me. And she tells me to close my eyes. And she's like, pretend it's like una chuleta con plátano. She's telling me, like, just pretend it's this. And I thought it was a game. I just closed my eyes. And I'm like, oh, that's so good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
just laughed about it. And I didn't really, again, understand that we were going through homelessness. I didn't understand what that
Mm-hmm.
really meant.
Yeah.
But we were homeless for about 6 months.
Wow.
And a lot of that just started to make more sense. I mean, I kept going to school. My friend was asking me why I was wearing the same shoes. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. To losing the storages that we have with all of our things. I
Yeah.
mean, I just
Yeah.
started to really learn that one, these materialistic things don't matter.
Yeah.
It's all replaceable. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is community. And so I started to
Mm.
really value and love community. And two, I realized that it wasn't about not working hard enough. It wasn't about any of
Yeah.
those things. It was
Right.
about my mom and my dad are both undocumented immigrants trying to work
Yeah.
in a country that is not built for them at
Mm-hmm.
all. And
Yeah.
people don't understand that immigration papers, and this was like my parents at the time, but all of my siblings at one point didn't have papers. And the amount
Yeah.
of money it costs, I mean, you probably know
Mm-hmm.
the amount
Yeah.
of money and time and energy that it takes to get to become a citizen. I
Mm-mm.
don't understand how my parents even made that work
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
six siblings, right? Like I don't
Yeah.
understand how they made it work. But I understood it was deeper than just we didn't work hard enough. It
Yeah.
was deep
Mm-hmm.
financial systemic issues that went
Mm-hmm.
against my parents and my
Mm-hmm.
family, and not just us. It went against a lot of Black and Latino communities
Mm-hmm.
because, again, systemically, we're marginalized in so many different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And I mean, even to paint the picture further, if you're undocumented, you don't get your papers if you're a criminal. But what counts as a criminal, if an undocumented person, let's say I was undocumented and I try to work under the table, that can technically
Mm-hmm.
be a criminal
Yeah.
activity. So you
Yeah.
either
Mm-hmm.
don't get paid and you don't work, or you get paid under
Yeah.
the table and you do something that's illegal, but you're getting money for your family. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to paint that picture for anyone to understand, like, these are the challenges that happen in the
Mm-hmm.
community. So those two things start making sense to me. Community is everything, and two,
Yeah.
things are hard for Latinos,
Yeah.
for
It
undocumented folks, for
definitely is.
immigrants, and it's not
Yeah.
easy. And what also became really clear to me in that moment is I didn't know how to talk about what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the most pivotal things that I learned in that moment, because now my whole platform, Hello Latina, is about having vulnerable conversations, about talking about
Mm-hmm.
things that might be hard, about talking about your story and
Yeah.
journey. In that moment, like, I kid you not, we never talked about what was going on.
Mm.
And
Mm.
if we did, we weren't in those conversations. I saw my
Yeah.
dad and my mom cry. I saw all of
Yeah.
my siblings going through their
Mm.
different emotions, and they were all different ages. So one was going to school, one was working full time,
Yeah.
another one
Yeah.
was she was a young mom. Like, everyone was going through these very different experiences and journeys. And I
Yeah.
remember just kind of looking around and thinking,
What's going on?
oh, why aren't we talking
Yeah.
about this? Like, can
Yeah.
we talk about it? And I don't blame my parents at all, but I think they didn't have the emotional capability or
Mm-hmm.
desire to have a conversation and look at their six kids and say, I'm sorry we're going through this. Like, I can't
Yeah.
understand as a parent how to even do that myself. And so
Yeah.
I think that shaped me moving on, like moving
Mm-hmm.
after that experience. Girl, it was
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to be vulnerable with anybody. And it's so funny that
Mm-hmm.
I built a platform on vulnerability, because
Yeah.
I was so closed off. I was like, la ropa sucia se lava en casa. I'm not talking to
Claro.
anybody about
Yeah.
what I'm going
Yeah.
through. And
Yeah.
now I see so much power in being open, being
Mm-hmm.
honest, being vulnerable, because we need more spaces to talk about the
Yeah.
hard stuff so that people who are coming after us know it's okay. It's okay to feel all these
Yeah.
feelings. It's okay to go through what you go through. There's a light at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the tunnel, right? Like, we didn't have those
Exactly.
conversations. And so I'll pause there. But that's a lot of my journey and how it impacted me and how I've kind of been able to unlearn some things I learned during that
No,
portion
I
of my
love
life.
it. No, I love it. And I feel like, I feel very related to where you say, one day you were just living your life and the next day you were packing and you're like, oh, what's going on? Right. Like
Right.
I remember there was a time in my life, I was 17, I think. And my mom decided that she wanted to try her luck in the States. And so she was going to come here and do something. I don't know, work, or I don't know what she wanted to do because she never talked to me about it. But one day I went to, like, my parents were divorced from when I was 5. So I had already lived my entire life like that. And I was with my dad that weekend. I went out with my dad. And when I came back, like, I left my house and everything was normal. And then I came back and there was nothing. Everything had been packed up. Like, the entire apartment had been packed up.
Wow.
And I was like, like what? And I went
Yeah.
downstairs and I saw my mom and I was like, what's going on? Like, where's all the furniture? And she's like, oh, we're traveling tomorrow. And I was like, wait,
Wow.
what? And so
Mm.
it was my mom, my sister, who was 6 years older than me, and then my little brother, who was 10 years younger than me. And I was staying
Wow.
home because I was still going to school, and I did gymnastics. So I had a really big competition coming up. And so, like, I was just staying, but nobody ever told me anything. Like, my dad knew that I was going to
Wow.
go and move in with him. And, like,
Mm.
my sister knew that they were coming over, but I was like, wait, what the heck? you know?
Right.
And it was so hard to process the whole
Oh,
part. Like,
God.
I remember
It
one time
happens
I
so
was like,
fast, right? Like you don't
yeah,
even have time to
yeah,
process. Yeah.
yeah. And then they just, at the most random time, it comes out, and you're like, why are you crying? Like, I feel like my mom abandoned me,
Yeah.
but I know
Wow.
she didn't. But it's just the fact
Right.
that, like, we didn't talk about this, that I was just, like, sprung on it. So, like, I hope as
Oh,
parents,
wow.
whoever wants to be that next generation of parents, like, at least we learn not to do this kind of things to the little ones.
Oh my God. I mean, I talked about that moment in the pandemic where I was able to ask my parents a lot of questions. So there was a point in our lives where I used to get upset at my mom crying. I'm like, why are you crying about something that happened so long ago? Like, she used to
Mm.
always tell me, "Se amacha, like, you don't gotta cry about it. Like, no
Mm-hmm.
llores, no
Mm-hmm.
llores." And that was a lot of my life with her. And then to see her cry, I had that same automatic
Yeah.
response of like, why are you
Yeah.
crying? And during the pandemic, can't tell you how many times me and my mom had deep conversations where she would cry about her experience. And I really started to
Mm.
see her as a human and say, Mom, I'm sorry that no one asked you about this. And no wonder
Mm-hmm.
she didn't ask us about how we were feeling about that moment in our lives, you know?
Yeah.
And I think now that I'm like old, as we were talking about, and now that I'm in a different place and being able to see my parents as humans, so much of their truth is so valid. And I see it. I'm like,
Mm.
no wonder my dad nunca lloró. That's why my dad never cried. And
Yeah.
the only time I've seen him cry was when we were going through homelessness. But my mom, no wonder she cries all the time now. She has so much that she wants to talk about, so much of her story that she wants to share, so much trauma that she's lived through
Yeah.
and powered through. And it makes me want to be that person for them, you know? And it's
Yeah.
almost, I think that's the
Yeah.
beautiful part about like a parent and a child dynamic is that at one point you kind of become kind of a parent sometimes to
Mm-hmm.
your
Yeah, for
parents.
sure.
And it's just been a beautiful journey with both of them. And I feel like my mom, mommy, papi have become like my best friends. And I call them up for
Mm.
everything. And we have a different relationship now that I didn't have as a kid because they were always gone. They were always working. And I
Mm-hmm.
internalized that as mommy and papi are never here, you know? But
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my God, they were working for me. They were trying to give
Yeah.
me everything. They were trying to give me and my
Yeah.
siblings everything. But I think to your point, now as parents, I know what parts of them I want to pass on and what parts of them that I
Right.
want to shift a little bit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Odalis, what you were saying earlier also, when you were talking about, like, the person you are now, is that you sort of have gone through life as living the experience of the first gen, right? You graduated from college in 2018, and then you started your career in the public relations space, and you've worked in corporate America, and all that as the first in your family to do that, like as the first generation. How has your experience been navigating those spaces?
Oh my goodness. It's been interesting. And I think it's funny because I was just talking about this earlier. I didn't know what first generation meant. It's not
Yeah,
like my parents looked at me and said, "We're
right.
immigrants, you're first generation." Like that's us, you know. Like, we didn't ever talk about that. And it wasn't until I was applying for college, and funny enough, I didn't think I was going
Mm,
to go to college because I'm like, I can't afford that. Like that's too much. And for context, me and my brother, we were the two that were born in the US, and we were always told like you need to go to college, you need
mm-hmm.
to go to college. And so he went to San Jose State
Mm,
first, and of course I followed because I was like,
yeah,
this is all I know.
yeah.
Like I'm gonna just follow whatever Patricio does, I'm gonna do that. But he had all these grants and scholarships, and I always give him so much credit. He was always the
Mm-hmm.
smartest one, too smart for his own good. I'm like, so jealous. Um, but I was opposite. I didn't have any grants or scholarships. I went to a school that was in a different county that was a lot more privileged. And so that was the first conversations that I was
Mm-hmm.
having about college. And my brother, he was in a program called Upward Bounds, which is in San Diego, and it basically helps these kids that come from
Mm-hmm.
the hood
Mm-hmm.
get into college. So what happened is in
Mm-hmm.
2008, that was the moment I was entering high school.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
moved a lot. So we moved to this place. We went into this 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom cottage. It was all nine
Mm,
of us living there. And I went to, it was in a middle class area, into a school that was a lot more funded. It was number one in academics, or number two in academics, number one in
okay.
athletics.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, what is this school? Like, te digo de verdad, like I thought I was in
Wow.
a movie. And it was the first time I was meeting so many people talking about
Mm-hmm.
college this, college that, college this, college. And I was like, college? Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you do that? And my brother at the time, he was just getting started in this process. He was in college and he was starting to figure it out. So he wasn't
Mm-hmm.
around all the
Mm-hmm.
time for me to
Yeah.
talk to and say, Patricia, help me with this, or Patricia, help me with that.
And
Like
he
he
was
was
going through
gone.
his own
And
experience,
so,
right? His own challenges.
oh my
Yeah.
God, he was going through his own challenges, his own experience. And there was like a disconnect there. And because of the school that I went to, I didn't have access to Upward Bound and those other
Mm.
organizations that help
Mm.
kids from the hood get into college. So I was like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen for me. Like, it's fine. And what's worse is my first year at that school, further context, I went to a school in the hood, and I didn't realize my experience era totalmente diferente. I mean, I was learning from textbooks that were held
Yeah.
together by duct tape and had to
Yeah.
share everything because we didn't have enough. And now I'm going to this school where, te digo de verdad, they were talking, and I was like, what are they talking about? Like, I was so totalmente
Mm-hmm.
perdida. Like, I was just so lost when they were talking the curriculum. I had no idea. I would ask some people around me, like, oh, did you learn that in school, in middle school? And they were
Yeah.
like, of course. And I would be like, oh, okay. And I failed
Mm.
my first class. And I remember that so clearly because in my family, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but in my family, la
Yeah.
educación es todo. We
Yeah.
were always told that education
Yeah.
is everything. And I saw an F on my report card, and I was like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God,
Yeah.
I'm dumb. And that's the first thing I could think of. I'm just not
Mm.
smart. I just
Mm.
can't do this. Instead of, because you don't know as a kid, like, this is
Yeah.
because I didn't
Right.
learn this in middle school. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, I don't get it. Like,
Mm.
I'm just dumb. And I never showed my parents my report card. That was always the thing with my parents. I'm like, they
Yeah.
trusted us so
Yeah.
much with our stuff that they never even checked. Um, but I just remember
Yeah.
feeling so out of place. And that was the first time that word imposter
Mm.
syndrome, I felt it for the first
Mm-hmm.
time in high school because it was a different area. I was ashamed to have people come
Yeah.
over my house because it was nine of us living in a 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom. I mean, there was so
Yeah.
much shame during that time for me. And not shame in just where I lived and where I came from, but shame in the way that I was getting
Yeah.
my grades, and the way that I learned, and the way that I spoke. I mean, there was so much that I was embarrassed about. And that was the first time I really started to put these layers on top of myself and hide who I was. I mean, it
Yeah.
started in that moment. And so I didn't know what to do with college. That was
Yeah.
the last thing on my mind. And junior year came around, and I think that's when you start thinking about college and everything. And I remember just crying. I'm like, I don't know how to do these applications. No one's helping me.
Yeah.
My brother, again, was at school. He was going through his own thing. He wasn't around. And my mom, being the resourceful Latina she is, she's like, oh, I remember the guy that helped Patricio get into San Jose State. Let me call him. Literally finds this guy's number and tells him, Tony, yo te doy chuleta, yo te doy comida, si ayudas a mi hija. Like, I will give you all the food that you want. My mom makes these ribs. It's a big Honduran thing. And she's like, I'll give you a rack of ribs and tamales and chuleta and everything else that you want if you could just help my daughter. And Tony came through, and he's helped other members of my family. It's really cute. But he came over to our house eating ribs and all of that, and helping me apply for college. And I didn't realize he had to pay to apply. And I'm like, how am I going to pay to apply for these schools? So there's so much that comes to your mind, and you don't realize that you're first generation through any of it. You're just like, oh, I don't get it. I don't get it. And he was the first one to tell me, like, Odalys Jasmine, like, you're first generation. You're going through this for the first time. And I told him, no, I'm not first generation. Patrick's there. Like, Patrick's in school. And he's like, no. You're both the same, around the same age. You're both first generation. You're both figuring this out. The first in your families to figure this out. And it was the first moment where I heard that term. And throughout college, I joined these different programs like EOP, Equal Opportunity Program, where I started to build community with people who came from the same place as I came from. And I started hearing that a lot, first generation. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, because my parents can't help me navigate this. They can't even give me money to navigate this. And they really tried. And I love them for that. But even graduating, I realized first generation doesn't just apply to college.
Everywhere.
Like, this applies to everything. I'm like, oh, I'm first generation at todo. Like, going into corporate spaces, even my brother didn't know how to help me there. He's like, I've never worked in corporate. Like, he worked in nonprofit his whole life. And going into corporate, I'm like, how do you navigate this? Sure. How do I show up as myself in this space? And I think it took a lot of, I'm still learning. I mean, it took a lot of me pretending to be someone that I wasn't. And then to realize halfway through my career, oh, wait, who I am is my strength in the workplace. The reason I'm creative, resourceful, I'm able to talk to a lot of people, build community, that all comes from my Latinidad. That all comes from where I grew up. That's what makes me different in this workplace. And so, I mean, first generation, navigating these first generation experiences, I think it's made me fall in love with more of who I am. And I hope that anyone who is first generation or identifies as first gen can really own and love that about themselves, because that's what makes us so strong in every space that we're in.
I love everything that you said. I love, but there's two things that you just said, right? One of them is your parents finding the resources, even though they can't tell, like, they couldn't give you money or they couldn't help you to apply to college, right? They still were there. They still found the resources. Like, she found Tony, she found community, and she's like, hey, I know you can come through, right? Like, and our parents have this way of just helping however they can, right? And like, I remember when I moved here, I wanted to move off campus, and I had the money because I had the scholarship, but I didn't have a credit history. So I couldn't rent an apartment because I didn't have a credit score. And so I'm like, Daddy, I want to move off campus, but I can't because nobody will give me an apartment. And he's like, okay, let me just call my friend. And so he called a friend from like all his life, and he's like, hey, could you like help my daughter? Could you be a co-signer? And like the amount of responsibility that means, right? Like to be a co-signer for somebody, like you're on the hook if that person doesn't pay up, right? But they're like, I can't give you the money. I can't sign for you, but I'm going to help you find somebody that, you know, can help you solve this problem. And so I feel like, you know, our parents, they're there however they can, and they show up all the time. And then the other thing that you said is that they couldn't help you navigate like the spaces in corporate or in college because they didn't go through it. They couldn't give you that information. But that's exactly why we are doing what we're doing, right? Like we're here telling these stories, telling the stories of other people and how they made it work so that the young kid out there that's 15 and is trying to apply for college is like, wait, my parents may not be able to, but hey, Odalys does a show and she talks to a lot of people, so let me listen to that, right? Like now
Yeah.
that is the reason why we do what we do.
Oh man. That's so beautiful because when I say Tony has helped out other members of the family, I remember my brother Jose Lucio, he stayed in Honduras, built a life in Honduras. He had a wife and two kids in Honduras. And then he moved to the US maybe probably like 6, 7 years ago. And he lives in LA and he has his life there. And I think for the last 7 years, we maybe saw each other once or twice, but I obviously always kept in contact with the kids. We all did. And they're family. So nos quedamos en contacto, but we never really, no convivimos. We were never really like together all the time. And I remember getting this call. This was a few months ago. This is last year. Random call from Jose Lucio. And I'm like, "Es un milagro?" Like that. Like he never calls me. And so I answered and he was like, "Hermana, I have a big favor to ask you." And I'm like, "Oh, ¿qué pasó?" And he tells me, Angel, his son, he's like, he's applying to colleges now. He's looking at colleges, but he doesn't know how to do it. He's stressing out. I don't know how to help him. I can't even understand what he's looking at. And he's like, "I know you've been through this. Can you help him?" And I swear to you, I like instantly got like on my mama mode. I was like, yes, let me talk to him. But after that call, I just started tearing up because I'm like, this is why I do everything that I do, because all of my nieces and nephews and familia, I mean, they're still growing up in the space that I grew up in. And I want them to know, one, they can do this too. They can be in the spot that I'm in too, if not better. Two, I want them to also know that you don't have to change who you are to fit into this space. And that's why I'm so big on be 100% you, because people are looking, and I don't want my niece, my nephew, the people in my family to look at me and say, "Oh, she had to change everything about her, her long nails, her big hoops, her red lipstick. She had to change all of that to be successful." I want them to know I'm still that Honduran girl from Southeast San Diego. So
it comes with it. It comes with it,
I mean?
right? Like,
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And it was so much of that moment was so special to me. And I did exactly what my mom did. I called Tony and I said, "Hey, my family needs you again." I remember telling him, "How much are you charging?" And he's like, "A rack of ribs." And I said, "We can make that happen." And since then he's been even a big part of our community and our family. But you're exactly right. The reason that we're here doing this is so that we have someone in the family that can help. And even that has brought my family, me and my brother, together, and we're coming together more, and we're experiencing life together more. And I am just grateful that that was the part that connected us.
And the other thing that you mentioned, right, is that you show up as yourself. You stopped changing things because our story is our superpower. The reason why we are resourceful, the reason why you're creative is because of the story that you had to live, the life that you have to live, right? And for me, that's exactly the same. It's like I never really quite changed who I was when I started working, but then I started getting penalized. And then I was like, what's going on? And then when I realized that's what was going on, I was like, well, screw you, because you recruited me. Like you came and you told me that you wanted to hire me because I thought differently.
You're like, you're hiring all of this.
Yeah, you're hiring all of it. Like half of it doesn't stay home, And I think, you're also really big about talking about personal branding and making sure that you share your story because that helps you build your brand. I wonder, what are your 3 pieces of advice that you can give people about building their own brand?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I would say the first thing is to own your story. I mean, it all starts there. Own where you come from. And for me, that came through a lot of therapy, a lot of journaling, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of me dates. I mean, a lot of just time with yourself and acknowledging who you are, where you came from. I'm a big fan of like, get a piece of paper out, or if you're a journaling person like me, like get a notebook, and write down everything that's part of your story, everything that made you who
Mm.
you are. And then you start to know, like, okay, this is my story. I'm owning it. Now, step number two, how can you condense that story into something that you can say in an
Mm-hmm.
interview, on LinkedIn, maybe Instagram post, wherever you want to say that story.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it starts with really owning and loving who you are and where you come from. And I think that process still comes with time.
Mm-hmm.
But from there, you're really able to start telling that story and knowing, like, from that story, what your why is, what motivates you, what
Mm.
gets you up every single day. And from your why, you're able to create like a list of things that you want to do, whether it's jobs or projects or things that you want to create, like a podcast, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
from your why, I think stems so much clarity on how you move in life. But I think own your story, craft your story, and start telling it and start putting it out in the world. And three, I think it's knowing that your story evolves and you
Mm.
have the chance to write the story that you want. And
That's
there's
amazing.
power in that, and there's grace in that. And I think when you own your story and start to put your story out there, you naturally start to put yourself out there a lot more, and you almost like your audience, whoever's consuming your personal brand, evolves with you. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the first thing I tell people, I mean, I can go deeper on these things and give more tactical tips on how to build your personal brand and give it, put it out there. But the one thing I tell everyone when I do this work is everyone has a brand. Whether
Mm.
you know that you have a brand out there or not, if you have a social media page, a name, and you're out there in
Mm-hmm.
general, people are making assumptions about you and they're saying stories about you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think owning your story comes with owning the narrative, and you get to tell the story that you
Mm.
want,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
so, I mean, I can give more tactical tips, but I think from a very broad level, it's
Yeah.
owning your story, putting your story out there, and knowing your story evolves.
I love it. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Like everybody has a story and you get to first tell your story, but then understanding that it can change. It's
Yeah,
also amazing. I think that is powerful because it helps
yeah,
you be it gives you freedom, right? To
yeah.
explore
Oh,
who you want to be.
so much liberation. And what I tell everyone is, you are not the circumstances you're born into. You can't control the skin tone. You can't control the zip code you're born into. I mean, you're born where you're born. You experience what you experience as a kid, but there comes a point where you get to take the pen back and say, you know what, I'm writing my own story and I'm
Mm-hmm.
making it the one I want. And there's so much liberation in owning where you come from, but also knowing that you get to write where you want to go.
Yeah.
And the one thing that my dad always tells me and used to tell me, and I used to be like, "No te entiendo." Now I'm like, oh, I love what he used to tell me. But he always said, si no sabes de dónde vienes, nunca sabrás dónde vas. And if
Mm.
you don't know where you came from, you'll never know where you're going. And I think that's the power of owning your story is you understand where you came from and why you move in the world the way you do.
Mm.
And from there, again, like I said, you can find your why and realize, oh, this is why I want to work in tech, or this is why I want to have a podcast, or this is why I want to be a speaker and facilitator.
Mm.
You start to realize that so much of your why and your brand is rooted in your story.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is you used to work at LinkedIn, and one of the things that you did was create experience for emerging talent, for diverse talent, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
imagine this being a lot of workshops related with professional development. Is there a piece of advice that you heard in these events that was shared often, regardless of the demographic or the type of group that they were talking about? And can you share it if there's one?
I think the one that stuck with me, I don't know if it's the one I've heard most often, but the one that stuck with me is your circle. You're building the circle around you and your board of directors, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when I say that, it means making sure you have people in your life that are helping you become better, not
Yeah.
just a better professional, not just a better employee, better
Mm-hmm.
overall. And when I say board of directors, it's almost like having a coach for different parts of your life. I mean, if I'm talking about my board of directors, I have my therapist,
Mm-hmm.
I have my mentor, my career coach, I have my friends, I have my circle, I have other mentors in the space, and my fitness trainer. I mean, I have all these different board of directors in my life. And the reason that stuck with me is because as a Latina, I was raised to not really ask for help, to figure it out on my own, to put my head down. If you work hard, you'll get what you want. You know what I mean? And it never once occurred to me to ask for help because I thought that was a sign of weakness. And now having a board of directors where they help me in different facets of my life, finances, fitness, mental health. I mean, it's the best decision I ever made is to ask for help. And if you think about that moment with Tony, that was my mom asking for help. And I'm realizing more and more in my life that you can't do anything by yourself, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Your community is your strongest, most pivotal and important and crucial piece of your success. Who's the community around you? Who's around you? Who's your circle, your board of directors? Who are the people who are influencing your life?
Yeah.
And so I think to everyone listening, it's being really conscious and selective and intentional about the circle and the directors you have on your board.
Yeah, for sure. And make sure that those people have your best interest in mind, right? Because it's not about just asking anybody. It's about wanting people in your corner that want to see you succeed.
Yeah. Because not everyone that's in your corner wants to see you succeed.
For sure. And then our last question is some sort of like a fun, light one. Imagine one of your best friends came to visit you in San Diego and they wanted to see the city from like your point of view, like a local's point of view. But unfortunately, you're out of town. So what are like the 3 top places to go or things to do that you would recommend for them to do?
I love this question. If we're talking about San Diego, the number one thing is to go to El Salvadoreño, which is a restaurant in Imperial, which is like also known as the Hood, but it's so cute. It's called El Salvadoreño, and it's amazing Salvadoran and Central American food. So pupusas, baleadas, they have those too. Everything Central American, that's the place to go. The second place, I would say the water. Go somewhere around the water, whether it's Coronado, which is my favorite place in the whole world. It's an island that lives across from San Diego, but it's still in San Diego. My favorite place. So after you get some Salvadorian and Central American food, go to Coronado or Sunset Cliffs. And then the last stop would be to go to either Barrio Logan or Balboa Park, 2 different feels, but it shows, Barrio Logan shows like the feel of the city, the Mexican American culture, the Chicano culture. And then Balboa Park is just a fun little place for you to walk around and just, have a little picnic or something there.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Odalys. I think next time I'm in San Diego, I'm going to make sure that I go to those places. I can't wait to try the food.
Oh my God. Well, there's a lot of, I didn't even mention the taco shops, the Mexican food is amazing.
I went
down
Central
there.
American food.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm Central American, so me gusta mi Centroamericana, but there's good Mexican and tacos too.
Yeah, no, I want to try that.
California.
Yes. All right. Odalys, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this space. I appreciate you. Un abrazote.
Igual. Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinX Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.